My name is Charmaine, 35 years old, and I am the woman who financed a family that despised me. I looked my husband Xavier straight in the eyes inside our luxury SUV, the air conditioning blasting, but the tension in the cabin suffocating us. I gripped the steering wheel and warned him with absolute ice in my voice. If your father says one more word about my salary today, there will be no more polite conversations. I will speak to him myself. I will make it crystal clear exactly where he stands, who owns the ground he walks on, and why my money is not his to claim. Do you understand me? Xavier just sighed, looked out the passenger window and muttered that I was overreacting again. Before I tell you how this explosive family barbecue ended my marriage and brought a toxic patriarch to his knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who underestimated your worth while treating you like a walking bank account. Stepping out of the car, the heavy smell of charcoal and grilled meat hit my face. This was the annual family cookout, a tradition Xavier and his family took entirely too seriously. We walked into the massive backyard of a sprawling Atlanta property. A property, I might add, that my venture capital salary paid the mortgage on. The yard was packed with Xavier uncles, aunts, and cousins, all holding plastic cups and laughing loudly. At the center of it all stood Otis, affectionately known to everyone as Big O. My father-in-law was a retired dock worker, a man who firmly believed loud voices equaled authority, and that a woman's place was strictly beneath her husband, no matter how much money she made. He was currently flipping steaks on the massive outdoor kitchen setup I bought him for Father's Day last year. As soon as we approached, Big O did not even bother to say hello or ask how our drive was. He pointed his metal spatula right at my husband and yelled across the yard, "Look who finally decided to show up!" The breadwinner and her little assistant. Several uncles chuckled from their lawn chairs. Cousin Tyrell snickered and took a sip of his beer. Xavier forced a nervous laugh, shoving his hands deep into his pockets and looking at the grass. I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached. I was a director of strategy at a top-tier venture capital firm. I worked 80-hour weeks managing millions of dollars in corporate investments. Xavier ran a failing music recording studio that had not turned a single dime of profit in 3 long years. Yet in this family, my financial success was treated as a direct insult to his manhood. Instead of being proud of having a successful black woman in the family, they saw me as a threat to their outdated hierarchy. Big O flipped a thick cut of meat, slamming it onto the grill, and shook his head with exaggerated disgust. "You know, Xavier, I was just telling your uncles here about the natural order of things. A man is not a real man if his woman is the one buying his shoes. A man leads. When a woman makes too much money, she forgets her place. She gets arrogant. She stops respecting the head of the household." The yard went completely quiet. The old-school music playing from the speakers seemed to fade away as everyone turned to watch the show. My sister-in-law Jasmine smirked from the patio, swirling the ice in her drink. She had never worked a day in her life and constantly begged us for loans, yet she always looked at me with pure disdain. Big O turned his gaze directly to me. His eyes were cold, filled with a deep resentment I had felt radiating from him since the day I married his son. "You need to put her in check, Xavier," Big O said, loudly, making sure his voice carried over the fence to the neighbors. "You let her walk around here acting like she is the boss, just because she wears a suit and goes to an office. That money she makes is not her money. When you get married, the woman's wealth belongs to the family legacy. It belongs to the husband to manage. You need to remind her who the head of the household is before she ruins your reputation completely." I stood frozen for a split second, processing the sheer audacity of this man. He was standing on a wooden deck I paid a contractor to renovate just 2 months ago. He was drinking premium dark liquor that I bought with my own credit card. He was trying to humiliate me in front of 50 people, demanding my husband put me in my place while actively enjoying the fruits of my grueling labor. I turned my head slowly and looked at Xavier. I waited for him to step up. I waited for him to be the man his father was demanding him to be, but in defense of his wife. I waited for him to say that we were a team, that he was proud of my career, and that his father needed to show some basic respect. Instead, Xavier looked at the ground, kicking a stray pebble with his expensive designer sneakers that I had bought for his birthday. "Come on, Dad. Just leave her alone," Xavier mumbled. His voice was weak, pathetic, and completely devoid of any backbone. That was it. That was his grand defense of my honor. The anger inside me boiled over, burning away any remaining desire to be the polite, respectful daughter-in-law. I stepped right past Xavier, ignoring his panicked gasp, and walked directly up to the grill. I stopped mere inches from Big O and looked him dead in the eye. I did not yell. I did not scream. I spoke with a terrifyingly calm clarity that commanded the attention of every single person in that backyard. "That is a fascinating perspective on family legacy, Otis," I said, making sure my voice was loud enough to echo off the brick walls of the house. "But since we are talking about who provides for this family, let us be completely accurate for the audience you have gathered here today. That Wagyu beef you are burning on the grill right now, I paid for it. The custom outdoor kitchen you are leaning your weight against, I bought it. In fact, the mortgage on the very house you are hosting this party and the roof over your head is paid entirely by the salary you just stood there and called arrogant." The silence in the yard was deafening. Jasmine dropped her glass on the patio table with a loud clink. Uncle George stopped chewing his food. Big O's face turned a violent shade of purple. He gripped the spatula so hard his knuckles went completely white, his chest heaving with absolute fury. "How dare you disrespect me in my own backyard in front of my family," he spat, taking a step toward me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. "I am simply stating the financial facts, Otis," I replied coldly. "If you despise my money so much, and if it threatens your manhood so deeply, you should immediately stop eating the food it buys and living in the house it secures. It is very easy to act like the ultimate patriarch when a woman is secretly funding your lifestyle." Before Big O could explode, I felt a hand aggressively grab my arm. I whipped around to see Xavier, his eyes wide with panic and embarrassment. He pulled me hard toward the side of the house, his grip tight and frantic. "Charmaine, stop it right now," he hissed through his teeth. "Humble yourself. Dad is just old school, and you know how he gets when he drinks. You are embarrassing me in front of everyone. Just apologize and go sit down." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, and then slowly looked back up to his face. The man I loved was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified little boy, a coward who would rather sacrifice his wife's dignity than face his father's disapproval. "I am not embarrassing you, Xavier," I said softly, yanking my arm out of his grip with enough force to make him stumble back. "You are embarrassing yourself, and I am done paying for the privilege of being disrespected." I turned around and walked straight through the yard, ignoring the murmurs and stares of his relatives. I walked out the front gate, got into my car, and drove away, leaving Xavier to figure out how he was going to pay the catering staff for the rest of the party with a bank account I was about to completely drain. That night was the beginning of a war they thought they could win. They had no idea they were fighting a woman who held all the keys to their survival. When I arrived at our empty 4-bedroom house, the silence was luxurious. I poured myself a glass of red wine, took a long shower, and went to sleep in our king-sized bed. I did not wait up for Xavier. I did not care how he handled the caterer. I woke up the next morning at 6 sharp, fully rested and completely clear-headed. Xavier was asleep on the sofa in his home office downstairs. I could hear his soft snoring as I walked past the room to get to the kitchen. He had obviously come home late, likely after begging someone for a loan or maximizing whatever low-limit credit card he still had left to pay Maria. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, sat at the marble kitchen island, and opened my laptop. It was a Monday morning, which meant I had to transfer funds from my venture capital firm escrow account before my first meeting at 9. I logged into my secure banking portal. The screen loaded, displaying my various accounts in a neat row. I moved the cursor to the joint savings account I shared with Xavier. It was an account we had set up for household emergencies, primarily funded by my year-end bonuses. I always kept exactly $50,000 in it. I stared at the screen. The bold black numbers read $30,500. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, assuming it was a glitch in the banking software. I refreshed the page. The numbers remained unchanged. Exactly $18,500 was gone. It had not been drained slowly over time. It was a single massive withdrawal initiated late Friday afternoon. The cold shock morphed instantly into a burning, focused rage. In my line of work, missing money is never an accident. It is always a choice. I clicked on the transaction history, my eyes scanning the ledger for the destination of the missing funds. The withdrawal was marked with a generic transfer code. I did not waste time calling the bank customer service line. I logged directly into the deeper routing details using the Premier account access I maintained. I needed to know exactly where my money went before I woke my husband up. I printed the transaction history. The printer hummed in the background as the pages slid out crisp and warm. I picked up the papers, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and walked down the hallway to Xavier home office. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of stale cologne and anxiety. Xavier was sprawled face down on the small leather sofa, fully dressed in the clothes he wore to the barbecue yesterday. His expensive sneakers were tossed carelessly on the rug. The dual monitors on his desk were black. His recording equipment, which I had purchased, sat gathering dust in the corner. He called himself a music producer, but this room was nothing more than a sanctuary for his fragile ego. I walked over to the desk and slammed the heavy ceramic coffee mug down on the glass surface. The loud crack jolted him awake. He gasped, flailing his arms as he nearly fell off the narrow sofa. He sat up, rubbing his bloodshot eyes, looking disoriented and panicked. "Good morning," I said, my voice dangerously even. Xavier groaned, running his hands over his face. "Charmaine, please. I am exhausted. Do you have any idea how embarrassing last night was? I had to call my cousin Marcus to borrow cash to pay the caterer because my card kept declining. Dad was furious. You completely humiliated us." I crossed my arms and leaned against the edge of his desk. "I am not interested in discussing your caterer bill or your father-bruised ego. I am interested in the joint savings account." The color instantly drained from Xavier's face. The lingering sleepiness vanished, replaced by the sharp, undeniable look of a trapped animal. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the laptop on his desk and then back to me. "What about the savings account?" he asked, his voice suddenly pitching an octave higher. I picked up the printed bank statement and held it out. $18,500 was transferred out of our emergency fund on Friday afternoon. I want to know where it is, and I want to know right now. Xavier stood up, wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans. He started pacing the small room, avoiding my gaze entirely. "It was an emergency, Charmaine. I meant to tell you, but you have been so stressed with work lately, and then the barbecue happened, and I just could not find the right time." "An emergency," I repeated flatly. "What kind of emergency costs exactly $18,500 on a Friday afternoon?" "It was the studio," he stammered, running a hand over his short haircut. "The mixing board blew out. The main console completely fried. You know I have that big recording session coming up next month with that new artist. If I do not have a working console, I lose the client. It is a business expense. An investment. I had to buy the replacement equipment immediately, or they were going to sell it to someone else." I watched him lie to my face. He was sweating now. His chest was heaving. He was desperately trying to construct a narrative that made him look like a proactive businessman rather than a thief. "You bought a new mixing console?" I asked, my tone deceptively calm. Yes, exactly," he said, jumping on the lifeline he thought I was throwing him. "It is a top-of-the-line board. It will pay for itself in 6 months, I promise. You always say I need to take my business more seriously, right? That is what I am doing. You just have to trust me. Stop being so controlling with the money, Charmaine. We are married. What is yours is mine." I let his words hang in the air for a long moment. I let him believe just for a second that his pathetic gaslighting had worked. I let him feel the relief wash over him before I decided to completely obliterate it. I looked down at the piece of paper in my hand. "That is incredible, Xavier. I genuinely had no idea that a music producer could record an album using a luxury German automobile. Xavier froze. His pacing stopped instantly. His mouth opened but no sound came out. I stepped forward and shoved the bank statement directly against his chest. He reflexively brought his hands up to grab it. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the highlighted routing destination. "I pulled the ACH routing numbers this morning," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, biting whisper. "This money did not go to a music supply company. It did not go to a commercial audio vendor. It was wired directly to Atlanta Metro Porsche, and it was not applied to your name. The wire transfer notes specify it as the down payment for a vehicle registered to your unemployed deadbeat brother Tyrell." Xavier looked at the paper, his hands shaking violently. "Charmaine, listen to me. Let me explain. Explain what I snapped, my volume finally rising, shattering the quiet of the house. Explain how you stole $18,000 of the money I earned to buy a luxury SUV for a grown man who refuses to get a job. Explain how you let your father scream at me about how my money belongs to this family legacy, knowing full well you had already raided my savings to fund your brother lifestyle." He backed away, bumping into his expensive desk chair. "Dad said Tyrell needed a reliable car to start his new real estate business. Dad said we had more than enough. He said it was my duty as the older brother to help him get on his feet. Tyrell is going to pay us back, Charmaine. I swear to God he is going to pay us back as soon as he closes his first house." A reliable car. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that held zero humor. A Honda is a reliable car. A Toyota is a reliable car. A brand new Porsche Macan is a luxury status symbol funded by a stolen down payment. You did not help him get on his feet. You stole from your wife to buy your father approval because you are too weak to stand up to him. "You do not understand how my family works," Xavier yelled defensively, his fear suddenly morphing into misdirected anger. "We take care of each other. We do not hoard wealth like you do. You sit on all this money and look down on us. Tyrell is blood. And I am your wife." I fired back, stepping so close to him he had to press his back against the wall. "But clearly to you and your father, I am just an ATM with a wedding ring." I turned my back on him and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice cracking with panic. "I am going to work," I replied without looking back. "And you have exactly 24 hours to get my $18,500 back into that account. If you do not, I am freezing every single credit card, checking account, and utility bill in this house." "You cannot do that," he shouted after me. "Watch me," I said, pulling the front door open. As I yanked the heavy mahogany door open, the crisp morning air was immediately shattered by the aggressive bass of a hip-hop track. A gleaming, brand-new metallic gray Porsche Macan was idling right in the middle of my driveway. It was parked at a crooked, entitled angle, deliberately blocking my own luxury sedan from exiting the garage. The exhaust purred with the sound of an expensive engine, a sound funded entirely by my stolen savings. Tyrell stepped out of the driver's seat. He was wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a fresh, pristine white tracksuit, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur he absolutely was not. Tyrell had not held a steady job since he was 22 years old. He bounced from one failed get-rich-quick scheme to another, always funded by his parents, or unfortunately, my husband. From the passenger side emerged my sister-in-law, Jasmine. She was already holding her phone high in the air, a portable ring light attachment, glowing brightly against her face, talking loudly and proudly to her Instagram Live audience. "Hey y'all," Jasmine cooed into the camera, tossing her waist-length extensions over her shoulder with an exaggerated hair flip. "Just wanted to show you what true Black excellence really looks like on a beautiful Monday morning. When you manifest greatness, keep your circle tight and trust the process. The blessings just overflow. Generational wealth is not just a buzzword, y'all, it is a lifestyle. Period. Say hi to the new baby. We are closing real estate deals in style now. Watch out for my husband, he is taking over the city." Generational wealth. The sheer audacity of the phrase made my blood run cold. She was standing on the driveway of a house I paid for, bragging to strangers on the internet about a luxury vehicle purchased with funds stolen from my emergency savings account and calling it generational wealth. Tyrell did not even have a single generation of employment under his belt, let alone wealth. He was 30 years old and still heavily reliant on his father phone plan. I marched down the front steps, my heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the concrete walkway. Xavier scrambled out of the house behind me, his frantic footsteps echoing my own. He was whispering my name in a panicked hiss, begging me to go back inside, terrified of the public spectacle that was about to unfold. I ignored him entirely. My vision was tunneled on the shiny hood of that German vehicle. "Tyrell," I said, my voice slicing effortlessly through the loud music. "Hand me the keys to that car right now." Tyrell leaned casually against the hood of the Porsche, a smug, deeply arrogant grin plastered across his face. "Morning, Charmaine. Like the new ride. Fits the aesthetic of the neighborhood perfectly, do you not think? It is a really good look for my new brand. My clients are going to respect me when I pull up to the showings in this." "Your brand is chronic unemployment, Tyrell," I snapped, stepping within inches of him. "And that car was bought with my money. Exactly $18,500, wired directly from my joint account on Friday afternoon. You are going to get back into that driver's seat, drive straight to Atlanta Metro Porsche, and reverse the transaction. Or I am calling the police right here, right now, and reporting those funds as stolen property." Before Tyrell could respond, Jasmine swung her camera directly into my face. The bright, harsh ring light momentarily blinded me. "Oh my God, look who it is, y'all!" She laughed loudly, her tone dripping with toxic venom and performative sass. "The Wicked Witch of the suburbs is mad this morning because her husband finally decided to step up, act like a real man, and help his own brother out." I put my hand up to block the glare of the light, swatting the phone away. "Turn that camera off, Jasmine. This is not a reality television show, this is grand larceny." Jasmine snatched her phone back, leaning in closer, making sure her few hundred followers caught every single word of her monologue. "You see this, guys?" She yelled into the microphone, pointing her manicured finger at me. "This is exactly what happens when a woman makes a little bit of money. She gets bitter. She gets hyper-masculine. She forgets how to be a supportive wife. You do not know how to support black men, Charmaine. You just want to emasculate Xavier and keep Tyrell down because you are miserable inside. Real queens uplift their kings. You are just a walking paycheck with a terrible attitude." The hypocrisy was staggering. She was calling me masculine for actively protecting the assets I worked 80 hours a week to build while simultaneously relying on my paycheck to fund her completely fabricated luxury lifestyle. Before I could deliver the verbal destruction she so desperately deserved, the loud screech of tires drew our collective attention to the street. Big O vintage Cadillac pulled up to the curb, parking illegally halfway onto the manicured grass of my front lawn. He practically threw his door open, marching toward us with Xavier Mother Elaine trailing anxiously behind him. They had clearly been summoned by Xavier's frantic text messages while I was confronting him in the office. "What the hell is going on out here?" Big O barked, his heavy voice booming across the quiet suburban street. Several of my affluent neighbors were already peeking through their expensive plantation blinds. I could not have cared less if the entire homeowner association was watching. "What is going on, Otis, is that your sons conspired behind my back to steal nearly $20,000 from my savings account to buy Tyrell a Porsche. And now they are going to return it," I stated firmly, not backing down an inch from his towering physical presence. Big O did not look surprised. He did not look ashamed. He looked directly at Tyrell and nodded approvingly at the gleaming vehicle. "Nice ride, son. Good solid German engineering. You deserve it." Then he turned his furious, bloodshot gaze back to me. "Tyrell needed a reliable car for his new real estate gig, Charmaine. You cannot expect a man to sell million-dollar homes driving a beat-up old Honda Civic. He has to look the part to get the clients. You make $400,000 a year. You are standing out here throwing a childish tantrum in the street over 18 grand. Stop being so damn greedy. We are a village. We elevate each other." Elaine stepped forward nervously, wringing her hands together. her voice taking on that sickly sweet preaching tone she always used to manipulate situations. "Charmaine, honey, please calm down. We are a village. We have to look out for one another in this cold world. Tyrell is just trying to get a head start in a tough industry. Xavier was just doing what a good, loving older brother should do. Money comes and goes, baby, but family is forever. Do not let the devil use finances to tear this beautiful family apart. You are so blessed you should want to share your blessings." I stared at the four of them in absolute unadulterated disbelief. Xavier stood silently by the front door, his head bowed like a scolded toddler. Tyrell was smirking, adjusting his designer sunglasses. Jasmine was busy checking her makeup in the reflection of the tinted car window, completely unbothered. Big O was glaring at me like I was a rebellious, disobedient servant, and Elaine was actively weaponizing spirituality to justify blatant theft. They truly believed they were inherently entitled to the fruits of my labor, simply because Xavier managed to put a wedding ring on my finger. They believed my wealth was a community chest, and they held the dice. I took a deep, steadying breath. I pushed the anger down and let the cold, calculating logic of a venture capitalist take over. I looked at Big O, then at Elaine, and finally locked eyes with my cowardly husband. "Xavier, step out here right now." He shuffled slowly down the driveway, looking everywhere but at my face. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. "I am going to make this very simple for all of you," I announced, my voice echoing with terrifying calm. "Because clearly, the fundamental concept of boundaries does not exist in this village. Xavier, you have exactly 24 hours to get my $18,500 back into that joint account. I do not care if you have to return the car today. I do not care if you have to pawn the expensive recording equipment in your precious, unprofitable studio. I do not care if you have to take out a high-interest personal loan in your own name." "Charmaine, you cannot be serious," Xavier pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "The dealership paperwork is already signed and processed. I cannot just undo a vehicle purchase. It will completely ruin my credit score, and they will hit me with massive depreciation fees. That is a personal problem for you to solve." "Not me," I replied smoothly. "Because if that exact amount of money is not sitting in my account by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, I am calling my bank and freezing every single joint account we have. I will cancel the premium credit cards you use to buy your organic groceries. I will stop the auto pay on your car insurance. I will shut off the cellular family plan that is currently streaming Jasmine live video. I will cut off every single financial lifeline you have tethered to my name." "You are out of your damn mind!" Big O shouted, stepping aggressively into my personal space. His chest puffed out as if he were about to strike me. "You cannot treat my son like a child. You are his wife, not his master. You do not dictate what he does with his own money. And he is my husband, not my financial dependent," I countered, staring him down without blinking. "But since he wants to act like a common thief, I will treat him like a massive liability." Xavier's face twisted with a sudden, ugly mixture of panic and deep-seated resentment. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to mirror his father's false bravado in front of his family. "You are being financially abusive, Charmaine. That is exactly what this is. You use your money to control me. You use your paycheck to control my family. You are holding my finances hostage just to prove a point and feed your own ego. You are sick." I let out a dry, hollow laugh that held zero warmth. "Financially abusive. Xavier, you cannot be financially abused when you do not possess any finances to abuse. It is my money. I earned it. I saved it. And I am completely done letting you all spend it. 24 hours, Xavier. The clock is ticking." 2 days later, Xavier approached me in our custom kitchen, staring nervously at his expensive shoes. He mumbled that his father had summoned the entire family for a mandatory dinner at their house that evening. He claimed it was a genuine peace offering, a chance to clear the air after the ugly incident in the driveway. Against my better judgment, and driven purely by a morbid, calculated curiosity to see exactly what manipulation tactic they would attempt next, I agreed to attend. We arrived at Big O and Elaine House promptly at 7 o'clock. The atmosphere inside the home was immediately suffocating and thick with unspoken tension. There was no apology waiting for me at the door. Instead, the dining room table was lavishly set with Elaine best china, the heavy silver cutlery she only brought out for major holidays and special guests. Tyrell and Jasmine were already seated side by side, whispering excitedly to each other, like children with a secret. Jasmine was scrolling rapidly through an expensive tablet, entirely ignoring my arrival. Big O sat rigidly at the head of the table, his broad chest puffed out, radiating a toxic, unearned authority. Xavier quickly hurried to take a seat near his mother, instinctively seeking her emotional protection, leaving me no choice but to sit directly across from Tyrell's smirking face. The dinner began in dense, awkward silence. I pushed the dry roast chicken around my porcelain plate, waiting patiently for the inevitable shoe to drop. Elaine tried desperately to force polite conversation about the upcoming spring weather, but her voice was tight with obvious anxiety. Finally, Big O pushed his half-empty plate away, cleared his throat loudly enough to silence the room, and picked up his glass of cheap red wine. He tapped his metal fork sharply against the crystal rim, demanding the absolute attention of everyone present. "I want to make a toast," Big O announced, his booming voice filling the cramped, dimly lit dining room. "This family has been through some rough patches this past week. Misunderstandings happen. Tempers flare up when people are passionate. But at the end of the day, we are blood, and blood celebrates its own." He gestured expansively toward Tyrell and Jasmine, smiling like a proud patriarch. As you all know, when Tyrell and Jasmine got married 5 years ago, they had to settle for a very small, quiet ceremony at the county courthouse. Times were tough back then, but this boy is a real man now, building a serious real estate empire from the ground up. And Jasmine has stood by him through thick and thin like a true loyal queen. They deserve a real celebration. They deserve a massive luxury wedding to show the entire world exactly what true Black excellence looks like. So tonight we are officially announcing their grand vow renewal ceremony. Tyrell grinned widely, leaning back comfortably in his wooden chair with his arms crossed proudly behind his head, looking exactly like a man who had just won the lottery without ever buying a ticket. Jasmine clapped her hands together rapidly, practically vibrating with uncontrolled excitement. She slid the illuminated tablet across the smooth table directly toward me, her long acrylic nails tapping sharply against the glass screen. "Look at the venue!" Charmaine Jasmine squealed, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that made my stomach turn. "It is absolutely perfect for the high-end luxury aesthetic I am going for this season." I casually lowered my gaze to the bright screen. It was a high-resolution digital brochure for the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was the most exclusive, hyper-expensive private club in the entire state of Georgia. It boasted an immaculate 18-hole golf course, sprawling marble ballrooms, and a notoriously strict entry code. It was also the exact country club where my venture capital firm held a premium corporate membership, a highly restricted membership that was strictly reserved for my millionaire executive client meetings. I looked up slowly, meeting her expectant gaze. "You want to host a vow renewal at Oak Ridge?" I asked, keeping my tone carefully neutral and devoid of any readable emotion. "Yes," Big O interrupted, loudly slamming his heavy, calloused hand down flat on the table. "And since you already have that fancy corporate membership, you are going to sponsor the entire event, so we can bypass their ridiculous 2-year waiting list." But that is definitely not all. We sat down yesterday and ran all the numbers. To do this right, with the premium steak, catering, the top-tier open bar, and the imported floral arrangements, Jasmine wants the budget is going to be exactly $60,000. Big O paused deliberately, locking his aggressive, unblinking gaze directly onto mine. "Xavier, as the older brother and the true head of your household, is going to step up and fund this beautiful event. You two will cover the entire $60,000 as your generous gift to the family." I sat perfectly still in my chair. The sheer, unadulterated delusion floating in that dining room was almost physically suffocating. They had just been caught stealing nearly $20,000 from me less than 48 hours ago. Their immediate response was not to apologize, but to demand a $60,000 luxury party at my exclusive corporate venue. Elaine nodded encouragingly from across the table. It will be such a wonderful blessing, Charmaine. God will multiply your finances tenfold if you faithfully sow this generous seed into your family. Xavier stared intensely at his empty plate, absolutely refusing to make eye contact with me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced water, placed the glass gently back on the small coaster, and looked directly into Big O's eyes. Not a single dime of my money is going to a vow renewal for two unemployed adults, I said bluntly. The silence that followed was absolute and heavy. Jasmine's jaw dropped open in genuine shock. Tyrell's arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by an ugly defensive scowl. Elaine gasped softly, clutching her cloth napkin tightly to her chest in horror. Big O's weathered face flushed a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. I continued speaking, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any sympathy. I am not sponsoring a party at my corporate club for people who do not know how to behave in polite society. I am certainly not paying $60,000 so Jasmine can pretend she is a wealthy socialite on the internet. And Xavier does not have $60 to his personal name, let alone $60,000, seeing as he just took out a desperate predatory loan to replace the money you all conspired to steal from me. So the final answer is no. You will have to find another way to fund your pathetic delusions of grandeur. Big O violently slammed his heavy fist down on the solid mahogany table. The antique fine china rattled loudly against the polished wood. The cheap red wine in his glass sloshed violently over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth with a dark spreading crimson blotch. "You disrespectful, arrogant little girl!" he roared, his voice echoing off the dining room walls, standing up aggressively from his chair to loom over the table. "You think because you wear a custom-tailored suit and carry a leather briefcase, you can sit in my house and talk down to my blood? You think your corporate money makes you completely invincible in the real world?" I leaned back in my chair, entirely unbothered by his theatrical display of masculine rage. "It makes me financially independent, Otis, which is vastly more than anyone else sitting at this table can honestly say today." Big O pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face. "You are going to pay for this wedding," he snarled, his deep voice vibrating with pure, unfiltered malice. "You are going to write that check tomorrow, and you are going to secure that venue, because if you do not, I will personally make sure Xavier divorces you, and you know exactly what happens when he does. This is a community property state. He is your legal husband. He is legally entitled to half of everything you have built. He will take half of your bank accounts, half of your retirement funds, and half of your little investment money. We will bleed you completely dry in court, and we will use your own money to throw this wedding anyway." Xavier flinched violently at the word divorce, his head snapping up to look at his furious father in total shock. He had clearly not been briefed on this extreme part of the extortion plan. "Dad, wait. We are not talking about a divorce." Xavier stammered, his voice weak, high-pitched and trembling with fear. Big O ignored him completely. His dark eyes locked onto mine with a predatory, triumphant glare. He honestly thought the threat of a messy public divorce would force me into immediate submission. He thought I was terrified of losing my marriage status. He did not realize that my marriage had already died the very moment Xavier allowed him to disrespect me at the barbecue. "You really want to play the legal game, Otis?" I asked softly. A cold, dangerous smile finally touching my lips. "You really want to invite forensic lawyers to look deeply into the hidden finances of this family?" I stood up gracefully from the table, smoothing the front of my silk designer blouse. "You have absolutely no idea what you are legally entitled to." I looked down at my husband, who was sweating profusely, trapped between his tyrannical father and the wife who funded his entire existence. "Do not bother coming home tonight, Xavier." I picked up my expensive designer purse and walked out the heavy front door, leaving them to sit alone in the miserable ruins of their own shattered entitlement, completely unaware of the absolute destruction I was about to unleash upon them all. I drove away from that house with my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The cool night air rushed through the cracked window, but my mind was burning with a terrifying absolute clarity. The threat Big O had hurled at me was not just a childish tantrum from an angry old man. It was a calculated declaration of war. They genuinely believed that by leveraging the legal bonds of my marriage, they could permanently shackle me to their financial dysfunction forever. They thought Xavier's status as my husband gave them unrestricted eternal access to the wealth I had built, with my own blood sweat and countless sleepless nights. I pulled my luxury sedan into a completely deserted shopping plaza parking lot, put the heavy engine in park, and pulled out my smartphone. I did not cry. I did not shed a single tear. I did not mourn the man I thought I had married. That man never truly existed in reality. Xavier was merely a hollow vessel for his father's toxic ambition and endless greed. My marriage was definitively over. Now it was purely a business transaction, a hostile corporate takeover that I desperately needed to manage with absolute ruthless precision. I opened my digital contacts list and completely bypassed my regular corporate counsel. I needed someone far more ruthless and cutthroat. I dialed Evelyn Vance, the most feared high-profile divorce attorney in the entire state of Georgia. She was a brilliant woman who specialized in dismantling entitled spouses with surgical precision. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in Evelyn's sleek glass-walled office on the 40th floor of a downtown Atlanta high-rise building. Sitting directly next to her was David, a brilliant forensic accountant who looked at banking ledgers the exact same way a starving predator looks at wounded prey. I slid my highly encrypted financial drives across the polished mahogany conference table. I told them absolutely everything. I told them about the stolen $18,000 the absurd country club wedding demands, and Big O Brazen's screaming threat to bleed me dry in family divorce court. Evelyn steepled her perfectly manicured fingers, a cold, predatory smile slowly spreading across her lips. "Let them try," she whispered softly. David quickly plugged the portable drives into his encrypted computer terminal and immediately went to work. I expected him to take several weeks to fully unravel Xavier's complicated financial mess. It took him exactly 4 hours. I returned to Evelyn's luxurious office that same afternoon after attending a brief corporate board meeting. The atmosphere in the large room had drastically shifted. David looked up from his dual computer monitors, his expression extremely tight and serious. "Charmaine, we have a very significant problem," David said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses carefully. "But it is also your absolute biggest advantage." I sat down gracefully, crossing my legs, my pulse remarkably steady. "Please tell me absolutely everything that you have just found now." "Xavier did not just steal that $18,000 for a luxury car down payment," David explained, pulling up a complex web of spreadsheet data on the massive wall monitor. "That was merely his most arrogant and clumsy move. I have fully audited your joint checking account, the household emergency fund, and the secondary business credit cards you generously authorized for his music studio expenses. For the past 14 consecutive months, there has been a systematic, highly calculated bleed of your personal funds. Small, continuous amounts. $200 here, $500 there, occasionally $1,000 deliberately disguised as standard studio equipment, maintenance, or utility overages." I frowned deeply, leaning forward in my leather chair. "How much money total?" $74,000 over the last calendar year, David stated flatly. My breath suddenly hitched in my throat. $74,000. How did I possibly miss that amount? "Because he cleverly kept the individual transactions just under the threshold of your automated banking text alerts," Evelyn interjected smoothly. "It was highly deliberate. It was meticulously planned. But the final destination of these stolen funds is what truly matters in this specific case." I looked directly at David. Where exactly did all my money go? It certainly did not go to his failing, pathetic music studio. David tapped a keyboard key, and a completely new legal document appeared on the bright screen. It was a long series of rapid wire transfers routed through a fake shell company registered to a generic post office box. "I successfully traced the company ownership," It strictly belongs to a dangerous man named Marcus Thorne. He runs a notorious high-stakes underground gambling ring, actively operating out of the dark back rooms of several abandoned industrial warehouses in the city warehouse district. Why would Xavier be illegally gambling? I asked, genuine confusion, momentarily piercing my simmering anger. Xavier absolutely hates gambling of any kind. He is far too terrified of losing money. He is not the one gambling, Evelyn said, her sharp voice dropping to a harsh, serious whisper. Look closely at the specific dates of the largest wire transfers. They align perfectly with the exact dates your father-in-law Otis took out secondary high-interest mortgages on his own residential home. Otis is completely drowning in massive underground gambling debt. Your coward of a husband has been slowly bleeding your savings accounts dry simply to keep violent loan sharks from physically breaking his father's legs. The shocking revelation hit me like a heavy physical blow, but absolutely not one of sorrow or heartbreak. It was a massive blow of profound, illuminating clarity. Big O, loud, aggressive, masculine posturing. His constant demanding speeches for my hard-earned money to fund the glorious family legacy. His absolute unhinged fury when I swiftly cut off the catering staff and aggressively demanded the $18,000 back. It was never actually about his bruised patriarchal pride. It was entirely about his desperate physical survival. Evelyn leaned comfortably back in her expensive leather executive chair, watching my face carefully. Most normal wives would be crying in absolute hysterics right now, she noted quietly, studying my calm demeanor. You look like you just successfully solved a very complicated mathematical puzzle. I did, I replied instantly, my voice completely devoid of any human emotion. Big O loudly threatened to legally take half my personal assets in a messy divorce. Can he actually do it? Evelyn laughed loudly, a sharp, highly dismissive sound echoing in the room. Absolutely not. First, the vast majority of your substantial wealth is fully protected by the ironclad prenuptial agreement we meticulously drafted together, which specifically shields all your venture capital investments. Second, your primary residential property is securely owned by a private blind trust established long before the actual marriage took place. Xavier is legally classified merely as a temporary tenant in that house. But far more importantly, the extensive documentation David just uncovered clearly constitutes gross financial misconduct and severe marital fraud. No family court judge in the entire state of Georgia will ever award him a single dime of spousal alimony when we definitively prove he was actively embezzling marital funds to secretly pay off illegal underground gambling debts for his father. We have them completely boxed into a corner. I looked intensely at the bright spreadsheets, analyzing the concrete digital proof of their ultimate unforgivable betrayal. They had foolishly played me for a gullible fool. They desperately wanted a legal war over my financial assets. I was going to gladly give them an absolute massacre. What exactly is our next strategic move? Evelyn asked, her silver pen poised eagerly over a fresh yellow legal pad. I stood up slowly and walked deliberately over to the massive glass window, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta city skyline. I successfully built my entire corporate empire in this difficult city. I was absolutely not going to let a pathetic family of lazy parasites tear it down. We do not strike them just yet, I said firmly, turning back around. If we aggressively confront them right now, they will instantly panic and hide assets. We desperately need to give them enough slack rope to completely hang themselves legally. I genuinely want them to believe they are actively winning this war. How exactly do we accomplish that? Evelyn asked. I have a previously scheduled business trip to London for my investment firm. I will go exactly as planned. I will leave Xavier alone in the house. I will absolutely not mention the missing funds we found. I will send Xavier a carefully crafted text message apologizing for my loud outburst at the dinner table and tell him I need some quiet time to seriously think about the wedding sponsorship. Let them foolishly believe the wealthy queen has abandoned the castle. Let them eagerly invite the jesters inside. I pressed send immediately. The dangerous trap was officially set. My private car service dropped me off at the edge of my driveway just after 9 o'clock on a brisk Thursday evening. The quiet suburban street was bathed in the soft ambient glow of expensive streetlights. I dragged my leather suitcase up the concrete walkway, looking forward to a long hot shower and a glass of premium imported wine. I stepped onto the expansive front porch and reached out to punch my personalized entry code into the digital keypad of the front door. The keypad beeped loudly, flashing a harsh red light. Access denied. I frowned, assuming I had simply miskeyed the numbers in my jet-lagged state. I slowly and deliberately entered the 6-digit code again. Access denied. A cold, sharp prickle of immediate suspicion ran violently down my spine. I reached into my designer purse, retrieved my physical backup house key, and slid it directly into the heavy deadbolt. It did not turn. The key refused to slide all the way into the cylinder. The locks had not just been reprogrammed electronically. The entire physical locking mechanism had been completely ripped out and replaced. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the front of my own property. A familiar metallic gray Porsche Macan was parked aggressively on the street directly in front of my mailbox. Tyrell vehicle, the one I had explicitly ordered Xavier to return. A massive wave of pure, unadulterated fury washed over me, but I violently forced it down, replacing it with the calculated icy detachment of a woman preparing for war. I left my heavy suitcase standing on the porch and walked silently around the side of the house, moving toward the large bay windows that offered a perfectly clear view directly into my custom-designed living room. I stood in the dark shadows of my manicured landscaping and looked through the glass. The sheer level of profound disrespect unfolding inside my home was staggering. The living room was brightly lit, the massive television blaring a reality television program. Tyrell was sprawled out aggressively across my imported Italian leather sofa. He was wearing his shoes. The heavy dirt-covered soles of his expensive sneakers were resting casually directly on the pristine cream-colored leather that I had specially ordered from Milan. But that was not the worst part. Jasmine was casually pacing across my expensive hardwood floors. She was not wearing her own clothes. She was wearing my custom-tailored floor-length silk robe. The deeply personal garment I had purchased during a private boutique fitting in Paris was draped carelessly over her body. In her hand, she casually held a fragile crystal wine glass filled to the absolute brim. Sitting completely empty on the marble coffee table was a bottle of Opus One red wine. It was a highly exclusive vintage I had been saving for 5 years to celebrate a major corporate milestone. She was gulping it down like cheap fruit juice while laughing obnoxiously at the television screen. They had not simply broken into my house. They had violently invaded my personal sanctuary and draped themselves arrogantly in the luxurious fruits of my exhausting labor. They were playing house with my entire life. I did not hesitate for another second. I marched directly back to the front door and began hammering my closed fist violently against the thick, solid mahogany wood. The heavy rhythmic thud echoed loudly across the quiet neighborhood street. I did not ring the decorative doorbell. I pounded on the door with the undeniable authority of an owner demanding immediate entry. The loud music and television noise inside abruptly lowered. I heard the heavy sound of approaching footsteps. The new deadbolt clicked loudly and the door swung open. Big O stood towering in the doorway, physically blocking the entrance with his massive frame. He was wearing casual sweatpants and a worn-out undershirt, holding a half-eaten sandwich in his thick hand. When he saw me standing there, his face did not register a single ounce of surprise or guilt. Instead, a deeply arrogant, highly satisfied smirk spread slowly across his weathered face. He looked down at me like a victorious king looking at a defeated peasant who had finally returned to properly serve him. "Hello, Charmaine," Big O said, his deep voice dripping with condescension. "We were not expecting you back from your little business trip until tomorrow evening." "Step aside, Otis," I commanded, my voice slicing through the cold night air like a razor blade. "You have exactly 30 seconds to explain why the locks on my home have been illegally changed, and why your unemployed son is wearing his filthy shoes on my furniture." Big O did not move a single inch. He took a slow, deliberate bite of his sandwich, chewing loudly before swallowing. He crossed his massive arms over his chest, fully intending to use his physical size to completely intimidate me. You really need to watch your tone when you are speaking to the head of this family, he warned, his voice dropping into a threatening register. Xavier told us to move in. Us too. I stared at him, my face a completely blank mask hiding a raging inferno. Xavier told you to move in, I repeated, my tone dangerously quiet. That is exactly right, Big O confirmed proudly. My son finally realized he needs to step up and be the man of this house. He decided this massive property is entirely too big for just the two of you. Tyrell and Jasmine need a proper safe place to stay while they plan their beautiful vow renewal, and Elaine and I need to be closer to the city for my medical appointments. Family takes care of family. Xavier is the man of the house, and he made an executive family decision to bring us all together under one roof. He leaned forward slightly, closing the physical distance between us, his foul breath washing over my face. You can sleep in the guest room down the hall until you finally learn some proper respect for your husband and his bloodline, Big O stated with absolute finality. Consider this an important lesson in humility, Charmaine. Your money does not make you the boss of my son. I looked past his massive shoulder into the hallway. Jasmine peeked her head around the corner, my expensive silk robe slipping slightly off her shoulder. She offered me a petty, triumphant little wave before quickly disappearing back into the luxurious comfort of my living room. They had meticulously staged a complete domestic coup d'etat while I was actively securing international investments. I did not scream at him. I did not try to physically push past his massive frame. I simply looked at him with an expression of absolute, terrifying pity. I will be right back, Otis, I said smoothly. I stepped backward off the porch, turned my back on him completely, and walked confidently down the driveway toward the dark street. I heard Big O chuckle loudly behind me, clearly believing I was retreating in total defeat. He slammed the heavy mahogany door shut, the new deadbolt clicking solidly into place. I stood under the bright glow of the street lamp, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. I pulled my smartphone from my designer coat pocket and immediately dialed my husband's number. He was not at the house, he was hiding. I knew exactly where he was cowardly taking shelter. The phone rang 4 times before Xavier finally answered. His voice was incredibly small, hesitant, and laced with absolute undeniable terror. Hello, Charmaine, are you back in town already? I am standing in the driveway of my own home, Xavier. I stated, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or affection. The locks have been completely removed and replaced. Your father is currently physically blocking the front door. Your brother is destroying my custom Italian leather sofa with his street shoes. Your sister-in-law is wearing my custom Paris silk robe and drinking a $5,000 bottle of vintage Opus 1 wine. Where exactly are you? I heard him swallow hard through the phone speaker. The faint, pathetic sound of his music studio equipment hummed in the background. Charmaine, please just listen to me for 1 minute, he stammered desperately. Do not make a huge scene out there. Dad said we urgently needed to show a united family front after the argument at dinner. He said you were trying to completely isolate me from my own blood. Just let them stay a few months, Charmaine. Please, it will be temporary, I promise. You gave them permission to change the locks on my property, I asked, demanding a direct answer. I had to do something to prove I was not just your financial puppet, Xavier pleaded, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. Dad said if I did not put my foot down, you would never respect me as a man. We are a family, Charmaine. You have to compromise. Just go sleep in the guest room tonight, and we can all talk about this calmly tomorrow morning when I get home. A man, I repeated the word, tasting like absolute poison on my tongue. A real man protects his home. A real man protects his wife. You are nothing but a frightened little boy, handing over the keys to a castle you did not even build, just to get a pat on the head from a father who is secretly stealing from you to pay off illegal loan sharks. What are you talking about? Xavier asked, genuine confusion breaking through his panic. What loan sharks? But I was already done talking to the puppet. The puppet master was the one I needed to completely destroy. I hung up the phone without another word. I did not call him back. I did not beg for entry into my own home. I simply opened the keypad on my phone, took a deep breath of the freezing night air, and dialed the local police emergency dispatch. The trap had violently snapped shut and they were all sitting entirely comfortably right inside the cage. 911 emergency, what is your exact location? The female dispatcher voice crackled through the speaker of my phone. I gave her my home address, my voice completely steady and utterly devoid of panic. I am reporting an active home invasion and illegal trespassing by a group of unauthorized individuals, I stated clearly. I have just returned from an international business trip to find the physical locks on my primary residence completely changed. The intruders are currently inside the property consuming my personal goods and refusing to grant me entry. They are hostile and claiming my husband gave them permission to occupy the residence, but my husband does not hold the legal deed to this property. I need officers dispatched immediately to remove them. The dispatcher confirmed 2 patrol units were en route and advised me to remain safely in my vehicle. I walked back down the dark street, climbed into the back seat of my waiting luxury town car, and instructed my hired driver to wait. He nodded, keeping the engine idling quietly. I pulled my sleek laptop from my carry-on bag and quickly accessed my secure legal files. I downloaded the official county property deed, the heavily stamped articles of incorporation for my limited liability company, and the specific blind trust documents that legally established my absolute sole ownership of the estate. I forwarded everything directly to my phone. I was entirely prepared for this exact scenario. 10 minutes later, the flashing blue and red lights of 2 police cruisers shattered the quiet suburban darkness. They pulled up swiftly behind my town car. I stepped out into the freezing night air, my heavy designer coat wrapped tightly around me, and walked directly up to the lead officer. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression. I immediately handed him my official state identification and my smartphone displaying the indisputable legal documents. "Good evening, officer," I said calmly. "I am Charmaine, the sole legal owner of this property. The individuals currently barricaded inside are my in-laws. They have illegally replaced the deadbolts and are actively trespassing. My husband, who is not present at the location, erroneously told them they could move in. However, as you can clearly see from the legal deed provided, my husband is not a property owner. He is legally classified as a mere tenant. He possesses absolutely no legal authority to invite anyone to reside here, let alone authorize the destruction and replacement of my physical locks." The officer carefully reviewed the digital documents, scrolling through the heavily verified trust paperwork. He nodded slowly, handing my phone back to me. "Understood, ma'am. Since they have forcefully changed the locks and denied the legal property owner access, this is a clear case of illegal trespassing and potential vandalism. We will remove them from the premises immediately. Please remain behind us while we make contact." I followed the 2 armed officers up my long concrete driveway. The loud television noise was still blaring through the living room windows. Tyrell was still laying on my custom leather sofa. Jasmine was still parading around in my expensive silk robe. They were entirely oblivious to the absolute legal destruction marching right up to their front door. The lead officer banged his heavy metal flashlight forcefully against the thick mahogany door. It was a loud, aggressive sound that demanded immediate compliance. "Atlanta Police Department, open the door immediately." The television volume inside abruptly muted. I heard the rapid, panicked shuffling of feet. The heavy deadbolt clicked open and Big O appeared in the doorway. His arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound confusion and rising anger as he stared at the 2 uniformed officers standing on his newly claimed porch. "Is there a problem here?" Officer's Big O asked, his deep voice desperately trying to project false authority. He puffed his chest out completely, blocking the doorway with his massive frame. "Step out of the doorway, sir," the lead officer commanded sharply, his hand resting casually near his duty belt. "We have received a verified report of an illegal break-in and trespassing at this specific address. Are you the legal homeowner?" Big O scoffed loudly, crossing his thick arms. "There is no break-in here. This is my son's house. I am his father. He explicitly invited us to move in and stay here. We are family. My daughter-in-law is just outside throwing a ridiculous temper tantrum because she does not know how to respect her husband's decisions. This is a private family matter." I stepped out from behind the officers, moving directly into the bright porch light. I looked Big O dead in the eye, my face a completely blank mask of icy determination. Your son does not own this house, Otis. He never has. And he never will. Big O glared at me, his face flushing a dangerous crimson. You lying witch! Xavier's name is on the marriage certificate. That means his name is on the house. Tell her to stop wasting your time, officer. The lead officer stepped forward, completely invading Big O's personal space. Sir, I have personally reviewed the official county deed and the legal trust documents. This entire property is solely owned by a private limited liability company entirely controlled by this woman. Your son is legally considered a month-to-month tenant. He has absolutely zero legal right to authorize anyone to live here, and he certainly has no legal right to authorize changing the locks. You are actively trespassing on private property. You have exactly 2 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate these premises, or you will all be placed under immediate arrest for criminal trespassing and vandalism. Big O's jaw dropped. His false bravado shattered completely in the span of 3 seconds. He looked back and forth between me and the stern officers, completely unable to process the brutal reality of his situation. She is lying, he shouted frantically. She is manipulating the paperwork. 2 minutes, sir! The second officer barked loudly, stepping firmly into the house and forcing Big O to awkwardly stumble backward. Move right now. The scene inside the house immediately erupted into pure, unadulterated chaos. Tyrell jumped violently off my imported Italian sofa, his eyes wide with absolute panic. Jasmine shrieked loudly, desperately clutching my silk robe tightly around her body. Get your filthy shoes off my leather couch, Tyrell, I commanded sharply, my voice echoing through the large living room. And Jasmine, take off my custom silk robe right now, or I will officially press separate charges for the grand theft of luxury property. Jasmine's face turned completely white. She sprinted toward the guest bathroom, crying hysterically. Tyrell scrambled toward the front door, slipping on the polished hardwood floors in his sheer panic. You cannot do this to us! Big O roared, pointing a trembling finger at my face. We are your family. You are throwing us out onto the cold street in the middle of the night. Where the hell are we supposed to go? You can go sleep in the luxury Porsche you bought with my stolen savings account, I replied coldly, crossing my arms over my chest. Oh, wait, I forgot. That vehicle is likely being repossessed as we speak because Xavier cannot afford the secret monthly payments anymore. Time is up, the lead officer announced loudly. Everyone out the front door right now. If you do not step outside this exact second, I am pulling out my handcuffs. Elaine came running down the hallway, crying loudly and clutching a small overnight bag. Tyrell grabbed his expensive sneakers, but did not even have time to put them on his feet. Jasmine emerged from the bathroom wearing her cheap sweatpants, leaving my silk robe crumpled on the floor. The officers physically grabbed Big O by his thick arms and forcefully shoved him out the front door. Tyrell and Jasmine were pushed out right behind him. They stumbled awkwardly down the concrete front steps, entirely humiliated. Tyrell was standing in the freezing damp grass in only his white athletic socks. Jasmine was shivering violently in the cold night air. Jasmine pulled out her phone immediately, turning on the bright ring light and shoving it toward my face. Look at this evil woman, she screamed hysterically into the camera, her voice cracking with venom. She is using the police to violently throw her elderly in-laws out into the freezing street. Cancel her. I looked into her glowing camera lens, entirely unfazed by the performance. Make sure you clearly tell your followers you were evicted for illegally squatting in a mansion you cannot afford, I replied smoothly. Big O was seething with an uncontrollable, violent rage. You think you can humiliate me and just walk away? He spat viciously, clenching his thick fists. I will go to your corporate headquarters tomorrow morning. I will destroy your pathetic career. I smiled coldly. Please do. I turned my back on his red-faced fury and walked to my waiting town car. The heavy doors closed, shutting out the desperate screams of the family who thought they could casually conquer my empire. The drive to my corporate apartment was quiet and peaceful. I slept exceptionally well that night, knowing the locks on my physical home were completely secure and the locks on my financial trap were about to snap shut. The next morning, I arrived at my venture capital firm headquarters in downtown Atlanta. The building was a towering monolith of sleek glass and steel, a physical representation of the massive wealth and unyielding power I wielded every single day. I wore a perfectly tailored crimson-red power suit, my hair pulled back into a sharp, flawless style. I was scheduled to meet with several high-profile tech developers, but I knew my schedule would likely be interrupted. Big O was a highly predictable creature of ego and rage. He had promised to destroy my career, and he was arrogant enough to actually attempt it. At exactly 10:45 in the morning, my desk phone chimed. It was the head of corporate security at the main lobby reception desk. He informed me that two agitated men, matching the descriptions I had provided earlier, were actively causing a severe disturbance downstairs. They were aggressively demanding an immediate audience with my firm chief executive officer, loudly claiming they had explosive evidence of my severe financial fraud and embezzlement. I thanked the security chief, instructed him not to call the police just yet, and calmly walked to the private executive elevator. When the polished silver doors slid open at the ground floor, the chaotic scene in the massive marble lobby was exactly as pathetic as I had anticipated. Big O was wearing a poorly fitted suit that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a dusty closet. Tyrell stood right next to him, wearing his signature designer sunglasses indoors, desperately trying to look like a legitimate businessman instead of a newly evicted squatter. Big O was leaning aggressively over the curved mahogany reception desk, pointing his thick finger directly at the terrified young receptionist. "I am telling you to call the head boss right now!" Big O bellowed, his loud voice echoing terribly off the high glass ceilings. Several affluent clients and corporate executives paused in the lobby, turning their heads to witness the embarrassing spectacle. "You have a massive criminal working in your executive offices. Charmaine is committing massive financial fraud. She is stealing from her own family and hiding illicit funds. If your boss does not come down here and fire her immediately, I am going straight to the local news stations and exposing this entire corrupt company." Tyrell nodded aggressively, pulling out his smartphone to undoubtedly record the entire interaction for Jasmine, pathetic social media audience. "She is a completely toxic liability to your corporate brand," Tyrell added loudly. "You need to handle this right now before your stock prices absolutely tank." I stepped out of the elevator and walked across the vast marble floor, the sharp click of my designer heels cutting cleanly through their ridiculous noise. My posture was perfectly straight, my expression an impenetrable mask of absolute corporate authority. 5 heavily built security guards were already circling them, waiting for my explicit verbal command to physically remove the intruders. "Otis," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the lobby, "you are currently standing in a private corporate facility. There are no television cameras here. There is only a highly trained security team waiting for my signal to arrest you for criminal harassment." Big O whipped around his face, instantly twisting into a deeply ugly sneer at the sight of my crimson suit. He completely ignored the heavily armed security personnel surrounding him. "There she is!" he shouted triumphantly, spreading his arms wide as if addressing a large crowd. "The fake corporate queen. You thought you could throw your own blood out onto the street and just come to work like nothing happened. I told you I was going to completely ruin you. I am going to make sure you lose this fancy job, your massive salary, and every single ounce of respect you think you have. I am going to tell your bosses exactly how you manipulate money and financially abuse your husband." I stopped exactly 5 feet away from him, completely unfazed by his loud, aggressive posturing. I slowly reached into the sleek leather portfolio tucked neatly under my arm. I did not pull out a security badge. I did not pull out a phone to call the police. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope that had been legally sealed with bright red tamper-evident tape. I held it out directly toward his chest. "Otis, I strongly suggest you lower your voice and take this envelope," I commanded smoothly. Because what is inside this document is vastly more important to the immediate survival of your family than your pathetic attempt to embarrass me in my own lobby. Big O stared at the heavy envelope, his eyes narrowing with deep suspicion. He did not reach for it. Tyrell, however, was highly curious. He nervously reached out and snatched the envelope from my hand, quickly tearing through the red tape. Tyrell pulled out a thick stack of complex legal documents, his eyes scanning the dense corporate jargon. He was clearly struggling to comprehend the high-level financial terminology. "What is this garbage?" Tyrell asked, his voice losing a significant portion of its previous arrogant edge. "Is this some kind of fake restraining order? You think a piece of paper is going to stop us from exposing you?" "It is a formal, legally binding cease and desist order," I explained, keeping my tone highly educational and deeply condescending. "It explicitly prohibits you, Otis Jasmine, and every other member of your parasitic family from contacting my employer, my colleagues, or my clients with your completely baseless, defamatory claims. If you speak my name in a public forum again, Evelyn Vance will personally sue you for aggressive defamation and severe emotional distress." Big O laughed loudly, a harsh, completely dismissive sound. "A lawsuit. You cannot sue people who have absolutely no money, Charmaine. We have nothing left for you to take. Your little legal threats are completely worthless against us. We are going to stay right here until your chief executive officer comes down." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the sharp, predatory smile of a woman who had just successfully cornered her prey. "You are entirely correct, Otis," I agreed smoothly. "You currently have absolutely no money for me to take, which is exactly why I did not simply file a standard lawsuit." "Tyrell, please turn to the third page of that document packet. Read the highlighted section directly below the cease and desist mandate." Tyrell flipped the heavy pages, his eyes landing on the bright yellow highlighted text. His arrogant expression completely vanished. The color violently drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He swallowed hard, his hands beginning to shake slightly as he read the complex legal phrasing. "What does it say?" Big O demanded, snatching the papers aggressively from Tyrell, trembling hands. Big O squinted at the complex legal text, his lack of high-level financial literacy completely betraying him. "What is this nonsense about commercial debt acquisition?" I took a slow, highly deliberate step forward, forcing Big O to instinctively take a half-step backward. "Let me translate the corporate terminology into extremely simple terms so you can fully understand the absolute gravity of your situation," I offered generously. "My venture capital firm manages billions of dollars in highly aggressive financial portfolios. We frequently acquire distressed commercial debt through a private, fully owned subsidiary company. Early this morning, at my direct and explicit instruction, my firm successfully purchased the primary commercial loan attached to your son Xavier failing music recording studio." Big O froze. The heavy legal papers dropped slightly in his hands. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, his loud bravado completely evaporating into the cold, air-conditioned air of the lobby. "I am talking about the $150,000 small business loan Xavier foolishly took out 3 years ago to fund his pathetic vanity project," I clarified sharply. "The loan he has completely failed to make consistent payments on for the last 6 months. The original bank was actively preparing to write it off as a total loss. My firm purchased that specific debt for pennies on the dollar. I now legally own the total outstanding balance of Xavier business. I am your son, absolute sole creditor." Tyrell let out a soft, panicked gasp. "You bought his debt. Why would you buy a failing loan?" "Because holding the debt gives me the absolute legal power to instantly call it in," I explained, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, Xavier Music Studio is officially in severe unrecoverable default. The grace period has been permanently revoked. According to the specific terms of the commercial loan he foolishly signed without having a lawyer review, he is required to pay the remaining balance in full, immediately upon demand." Big O shook his head violently in total denial. "You cannot do that. He is your husband. You are supposed to be helping him build his business, not destroying it. You are legally married to him. I am legally divorcing him." "Otis," I corrected swiftly. And since he chose to systematically steal $74,000 from our joint accounts to secretly pay off your massive underground gambling debts, I feel absolutely no moral obligation to subsidize his failed music career any longer. Big O flinched physically, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock. The mention of his secret gambling debts hitting the air in my corporate lobby completely shattered his tough guy facade. He looked around nervously, suddenly hyper-aware of the security guards listening intently to every single word. "How did you know about that?" he stammered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "I know absolutely everything, I promised coldly. I know exactly who you owe. I know exactly how much blood money Xavier stole from me to protect your kneecaps. And I know exactly how to completely dismantle the remaining pathetic pieces of your lives." I pointed my manicured finger directly at the legal document in his trembling hand. "Your son has exactly 48 hours to produce a certified bank check for $150,000. If that specific amount is not delivered directly to my legal counsel by noon on Monday, my firm will execute a hostile seizure of all commercial assets. We will legally confiscate his expensive recording consoles, his soundproof booths, his computers, and every single piece of intellectual property currently stored on those servers. We will padlock the studio doors and liquidate the entire business to recover my firm financial investment." "You are going to completely ruin him," Big O whispered, the terrible reality of the situation finally crashing down on his shoulders. "The studio is the only thing Xavier has left in this world." "No, Otis," I corrected sharply. "You completely ruined him. You demanded he steal from his own wife to cover your degenerate gambling habits. You demanded he sacrifice his marriage to feed your toxic, outdated, patriarchal ego. You dragged your entire family into a financial war with a woman who actively destroys million-dollar corporations before lunchtime. You are the sole architect of this massive destruction." I turned my head slightly and nodded directly to the towering head of security. "Escort these two individuals off the private property immediately," I commanded. "If they resist, or if they ever set foot inside this building again, arrest them for criminal trespassing." The heavy security guards instantly stepped forward, grabbing Big O and Tyrell firmly by their arms. All the fight had completely left Big O's massive frame. He did not scream. He did not threaten me. He allowed himself to be physically dragged backward toward the heavy revolving glass doors, his wide, terrified eyes locked onto mine the entire time. Tyrell was completely silent, his phone securely hidden away, realizing that trying to publicly shame me had just cost his brother his entire livelihood. I stood in the center of my pristine marble lobby and watched them get thrown out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. They were entirely broken, entirely defeated, and entirely out of options. The clock was aggressively ticking down from 48 hours. I smoothed the lapels of my crimson power suit, turned gracefully around, and walked back to the private executive elevator. I had a very important corporate meeting to attend, and I refused to be late. That evening, I retreated to my luxury corporate apartment, located in the bustling heart of the financial district. It was a sleek, minimalist space, provided entirely by my firm, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sparkling city skyline. For the first time in many years, I felt a profound sense of absolute tranquility. The heavy, suffocating weight of Xavier and his parasitic family was finally lifting from my tired shoulders. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, ready to review some financial portfolios, when the security intercom system buzzed sharply, echoing loudly through the quiet, empty rooms. The building concierge informed me that my husband was standing down in the main lobby, practically begging to be led upstairs immediately. He was allegedly causing a highly embarrassing scene, crying openly and pleading desperately with the front desk staff. I calmly instructed the security guards to allow him to come up. I knew this emotional confrontation was absolutely inevitable, and I deeply wanted to crush the very last remaining remnants of his pathetic delusion tonight. Less than 3 minutes later, a rapid, frantic knock echoed heavily against my thick wooden door. I walked over and pulled it open entirely. I opened the heavy wooden door to find Xavier looking completely destroyed. His expensive clothes were deeply wrinkled, His dark eyes were bloodshot and violently swollen, and his hands were trembling uncontrollably. The arrogant, highly entitled man who had confidently allowed his toxic family to violently change the physical locks on my home was entirely gone. In his miserable place stood a broken, terrified boy who had finally realized the absolute magnitude of his disastrous financial mistakes. Charmaine. Please, Xavier gasped loudly, his weak voice cracking horribly as he stumbled awkwardly forward into my pristine, perfectly clean front apartment entryway. He practically collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor, dropping heavily directly onto his knees. He desperately grabbed the bottom hem of my expensive tailored skirt, his salty tears rapidly staining the premium fabric. You have to stop this immediately. You have to call off the aggressive debt collection right now. My father just told me everything that happened at your corporate office today. They aggressively took my recording studio keys, Charmaine. The primary bank sent legal representatives this afternoon and officially padlocked the heavy glass front doors. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing inside my empty, cold chest. There was absolutely no pity remaining. There was no residual romantic love. There was only the cold, clinical observation of a massive financial liability finally being permanently neutralized. I stepped backward, forcefully, physically forcing him to release my clothing completely. You are currently in severe default on a massive commercial business loan, Xavier. When you continuously fail to pay your legal financial debts, the angry creditors legally seize the physical corporate assets. That is basic corporate business. You always told everyone you wanted to be a real successful businessman. Welcome to the absolute brutal reality of high-stakes corporate finance. He sobbed loudly, burying his tear-stained face deeply into his shaking hands. It is my entire life dream, Charmaine. That music studio is absolutely everything I have ever worked for. You cannot just ruthlessly take it away from me. I know I messed up terribly. I know secretly stealing the savings money was completely wrong, but my father aggressively made me do it. He violently pressured me every single day. He constantly told me the dangerous underground loan sharks were going to actually kill him if I did not very quickly help pay off his massive illegal gambling debts. He emotionally manipulated me because I am his loyal son, and I desperately wanted him to finally be proud of me. You know exactly how he is. He gets deep inside your head. I was just trying to quietly protect my family. I walked slowly over to the sleek glass dining table and picked up a thick, legally bound document resting quietly on the clean surface. Protect your precious family, I repeated softly, slowly turning back around to face his miserable form. You actively stole from your own devoted wife to secretly protect a violent, degenerate, completely toxic old gambler. You gladly allowed your unemployed brother to parade arrogantly around the city in a luxury vehicle bought exclusively with my stolen savings. You happily permitted your entitled sister-in-law to raid my personal closet and drink my highly expensive vintage wine. You did not protect your family, Xavier. You simply chose exactly which family member you were completely willing to actively sacrifice, and you foolishly chose me. I walked back over to him and dropped the heavy legal document directly onto the polished floor, right in front of his shaking knees. He stared down at it, completely terrified now. "What is this paperwork?" he whispered weakly, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Those are the official divorce papers," I stated clearly and firmly. "They have already been formally filed with the downtown county courthouse. My ruthless attorney, Evelyn Vance, has ensured they are completely ironclad. You are going to sign them tonight." Xavier stared at the thick papers as if they were highly venomous snakes. He slowly shook his head, pushing himself awkwardly up off the hardwood floor. "No. No, I am absolutely not signing these documents. We can easily fix this massive mistake, Charmaine. We can go to counseling tomorrow. I will completely cut my father off forever. I will never speak to Tyrell or Jasmine ever again. I will do whatever you want me to do. Please, just give me one more chance to properly prove I can be a real supportive husband to you." I crossed my arms tightly, deliberately maintaining my absolute emotional distance. I do not want a real husband anymore, Xavier. I simply want peace. For the last 7 long years, I completely carried you. I always heavily carried your massive financial burdens. I carried your incredibly fragile ego and your totally unearned masculine pride. I carried your brother pathetic, completely fabricated luxury lifestyle. I carried your father toxic, wildly outdated patriarchal delusions. I was the solid financial foundation that actively kept your entire miserable bloodline from completely collapsing into the dirty street. But I am absolutely done lifting dead weight today. Sign the papers immediately. A sudden, highly predictable shift violently occurred in Xavier's overall demeanor. The desperate, pathetic sadness vanished instantly, quickly replaced by the exact same ugly, highly entitled anger his toxic father always displayed whenever fiercely backed into a tight corner. He violently kicked the divorce papers across the hardwood floor. "I am not signing a damn thing tonight," Xavier shouted loudly, his entire face rapidly turning a dark, angry red. "You really think you can just ruthlessly throw me away like common garbage just because you easily make $400,000 every single year? You arrogantly think you currently hold all the power here. I am your legal, lawful husband. If you truly want this divorce so badly, you are going to have to forcefully drag me through the public court system for many long years." He pointed a shaking finger directly at my calm, completely unbothered, stoic face. "I will legally demand massive alimony. I will demand monthly spousal support. I completely gave up prime earning years of my important music career just to support your aggressive corporate ambitions. The family judge will absolutely force you to legally maintain the high standard of living I have pleasantly grown accustomed to. You will be writing me a massive financial check every single month for the absolute rest of your life." I smiled coldly. It was a genuine, terrifying smile of pure, calculated anticipation. I had explicitly planned for this exact outburst. "Go ahead," I challenged smoothly, smiling very brightly. "Refuse to sign the paperwork, hire an expensive lawyer, drag this entire mess out in open family court. I would absolutely love to have a judge put our entire financial history on the public record." Xavier sneered arrogantly. "You think I am scared of a judge seeing I paid off my dad debts? It makes you look like a cold, heartless witch who completely refused to properly help her struggling family in a massive emergency." I slowly walked over to my leather briefcase, resting on the nearby armchair. I pulled out a single thin folder and held it straight up. "No, Xavier. I do not care about the gambling debts. What I care about is the Federal Small Business Administration loan you applied for 2 years ago, the exact one you used to initially lease your commercial studio space. You claimed you had sufficient collateral to secure the funding, so you secretly used the house owned by my private LLC. And to legally do that, you forged my signature on federal banking documents. That is severe financial fraud. That is a federal felony. Sign the divorce papers right now, or I will hand this forged document to federal police authorities." Xavier stared at the single sheet of paper in my hand, his face draining of all remaining color. He knew absolutely well that I possessed the precise documentation to send him directly to a federal penitentiary. The pathetic defiance completely drained from his body. With shaking hands, he reached for the expensive pen resting on my glass table. He did not say another word as he hastily scribbled his signature across the thick stack of divorce papers, legally surrendering every single claim to my massive corporate assets. I calmly collected the signed documents, secured them inside my leather briefcase, and ordered the security concierge to escort him out of my building. The very next morning, the absolute financial destruction I had carefully orchestrated began to violently accelerate. Because Xavier was completely terrified of my federal fraud evidence, he explicitly instructed his bank to immediately freeze all automated outgoing transfers. That critical action triggered the exact masterstroke preparation I had been eagerly anticipating. Tyrell and Jasmine were currently staying at a cheap run-down extended-stay motel on the outskirts of the city after being rightfully evicted from my property. They had managed to keep the metallic gray Porsche Macan parked proudly outside their cheap motel room, desperately trying to maintain their fake luxury aesthetic on social media. But without Xavier secretly funneling my stolen savings to cover the exorbitant monthly premium, the aggressive dealership financing department moved with brutal efficiency. On a bright Thursday afternoon, a heavy commercial tow truck forcefully backed into the motel parking lot. Jasmine was standing outside on the cracked concrete, holding her portable ring light, actively filming a live video about overcoming temporary setbacks, when the repo man securely hooked the heavy steel chains to the front axle of her beloved vehicle. Tyrell ran out of the motel room, wearing only his boxers, screaming aggressively and threatening to physically fight the towing crew. The repo man simply handed Tyrell a printed default notice and hoisted the expensive German engineering onto the flatbed. Jasmine dropped her phone on the dirty pavement, completely humiliated in front of her remaining internet followers as the physical manifestation of their fake generational wealth was towed away into the busy afternoon traffic. The immediate loss of the luxury vehicle completely broke their fragile reality. Panic violently ripped through the entire family. Big O realized his absolute control was rapidly evaporating. He urgently called a mandatory emergency family meeting at his heavily mortgaged suburban house later that exact same evening. He dragged a completely defeated Xavier along, demanding the entire family pool their deeply limited financial resources. I knew precisely about this desperate gathering because Evelyn Vance had hired a private investigator to officially serve the remaining legal documents, and the investigator was quietly sitting in an unmarked vehicle directly across the street from Big O house. According to the investigator audio surveillance, the atmosphere inside the house was absolute chaos. Big O was pacing the worn living room carpet, aggressively shouting at Elaine to empty her tiny retirement account. He boldly promised Tyrell and Jasmine that they would pool their meager cash, hire a ruthless bulldog family attorney, and aggressively sue me for massive spousal support and emotional damages. He was completely delusional, still actively believing he could successfully intimidate the legal system the exact same way he intimidated his weak sons. I decided it was the perfect moment to personally deliver the final crushing blow. I called Evelyn Vance, who was already waiting nearby. I changed into a stunning, perfectly tailored black designer trench coat, slipped on my expensive leather gloves, and instructed my private driver to take me directly to the suburbs. When my sleek black town car pulled smoothly up to the curb, Evelyn was already waiting on the sidewalk alongside a tall, heavily built process server, carrying a thick leather binder. We walked deliberately up the cracked concrete driveway of Big O property. I did not bother knocking respectfully. The heavy wooden front door was slightly ajar, likely left open by Tyrell when he stormed inside earlier to angrily complain about his repossessed vehicle. I pushed the door wide open and stepped confidently into the cramped, poorly decorated living room. The entire family was gathered around the cheap coffee table, aggressively arguing about money. Xavier was sitting on the edge of the sofa, looking completely numb. Tyrell was pacing furiously while Jasmine sat in the corner, wiping mascara-stained tears from her cheeks. Elaine was holding a small calculator, her face etched with profound panic. When my expensive leather heels clicked sharply against the entryway floor, the loud arguing instantly ceased. 5 pairs of shocked, horrified eyes snapped directly toward me. I stood in the doorway, flanked by a top-tier corporate attorney and a massive legal enforcer. I looked absolutely untouchable. Big O's face violently contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. The sight of me standing proudly inside his domain completely shattered his fragile ego. He jumped up from his worn recliner, his massive chest heaving, his fists tightly clenched at his sides. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" he roared, his deep voice shaking the framed pictures on the living room walls. "You have absolutely no right to be here. Get out of my house right now, you arrogant failure of a wife." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I stared directly into his furious, bloodshot eyes, my expression a completely flawless mask of absolute icy authority. "I will," I responded, my voice smooth, quiet, and terrifyingly calm. "Right after I collect exactly what is mine." I stepped fully into the living room, allowing Evelyn and the process server to move aggressively into the space behind me. Big O tried to step forward to physically intimidate me, but the massive process server instantly stepped cleanly between us, placing a heavy hand directly on his utility belt. Big O stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting nervously toward the large man. "You are trespassing!" Tyrell shouted from the back of the room, desperately trying to sound tough, despite his recent humiliating vehicle repossession. "We are calling the police on you right now." "Please do." Evelyn Vance interjected smoothly, stepping forward and opening her sleek leather briefcase. "The local authorities would be highly interested in reviewing the extensive documentation we have brought here tonight. But before you dial emergency services, I strongly suggest you all sit down and listen very carefully to what my client has to say, because this is the absolute last time she will ever offer you the courtesy of a face-to-face conversation." Elaine pulled Xavier tightly by the arm, forcing him to sit back down on the sofa. Xavier refused to look at me. He kept his eyes securely glued to the cheap floor rug, completely consumed by his own pathetic shame. Big O remained standing, his heavy jaw clenched tight, but he did not make another aggressive move toward me. The absolute reality of my unchecked power was finally crushing his patriarchal delusions. "Otis." I began keeping my tone perfectly measured and professional. "You called an emergency meeting tonight to aggressively demand your family empty their savings accounts to hire a lawyer to sue me. You told them I was a weak, vulnerable target. You completely promised them you would forcefully extract my wealth to fund their pathetic, lazy lifestyles." Big O crossed his thick arms, sticking his chin out stubbornly. "You owe this family," he spat bitterly. "You married my son. You took a sacred vow. You cannot just ruthlessly abandon him and take all the money when things get slightly complicated. A real judge will completely strip you of your arrogant wealth." I let out a soft, highly dismissive laugh. "A real judge has already formally accepted the signed, legally binding divorce documents your son willingly executed last night," I corrected sharply. "Xavier fully surrendered every single claim to my financial assets, my corporate investments, and my real estate properties. He gets absolutely nothing. There will be no massive alimony checks. There will be no spousal support. There will be no free luxury cars or expensive country club weddings." Jasmine gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hands. Tyrell looked like he was going to be physically sick. "But that is not actually why I came here tonight." I continued, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. "I did not come here to gloat about the divorce. I came here to finalize a completely different financial transaction. Evelyn, please present the relevant documentation to the head of the household." Evelyn smiled sharply, pulling a thick stack of papers from her briefcase. She handed them directly to the process server, who stepped forward and forcefully shoved the heavy documents directly into Big O's chest. Big O awkwardly caught the papers, looking down at them with intense confusion and rising dread. "What is this garbage now?" Big O demanded, his voice cracking slightly with unhidden fear. "That, Otis, is the absolute consequence of your massive unchecked greed," I stated coldly. "I told you yesterday that my venture capital firm legally purchased the primary debt of Xavier failing music studio. Today we successfully executed the hostile commercial seizure. The bank has officially locked the doors, seized the equipment, and placed the property up for immediate commercial auction. But unfortunately for you, the total liquidated value of his pathetic studio equipment does not even come close to covering the massive $150,000 outstanding loan balance." Big O stared at me, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "What does that have to do with me? I did not sign his business loan." "No, you did not," I agreed smoothly, "but Xavier did. And when Xavier secretly wired $74,000 of my stolen marital funds to a violent underground gambling syndicate to pay off your illicit debts, he committed severe financial embezzlement. My forensic accountants successfully traced every single penny of that stolen money directly to your personal gambling ledgers." Big O's face went completely ashen. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the cheap coffee table. "Therefore," I explained, enjoying the absolute terror radiating from his entire body, "my firm legal department officially filed a massive civil restitution lawsuit against you personally this afternoon. We are aggressively holding you fully liable for the stolen marital assets used to illegally benefit your gambling habits. You owe my corporate firm $74,000 payable immediately." "I do not have that kind of money," Big O whispered, his voice completely stripped of its usual loud, aggressive boom. You know I do not have it. I am a retired dock worker. I know exactly what you are. Otis, I replied, my eyes narrowing with pure, unfiltered disgust. You are a toxic parasite who destroys his own children to feed his pathetic ego. I know you do not have the liquid cash, but you do have this house. You have considerable equity built up in this property over the last 30 years. The documents you are currently holding include a fully approved judicial property lien. Elaine let out a piercing, hysterical scream, burying her face into Xavier's shoulder. We have officially placed a legal lien on your residential home, I declared, my voice echoing with absolute, undeniable finality. You cannot sell it. You cannot refinance it. You cannot borrow against it. If you do not produce $74,000 by the end of this month, my firm will aggressively force the immediate public auction of this house to satisfy the debt. You tried to throw me out of my own home, Otis. Now I am officially taking yours. The silence that immediately followed my declaration was absolute and profound. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a massive structure completely collapsing under its own corrupted weight. Big O stared at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He looked wildly around the room, desperately seeking some form of confirmation that this was merely a cruel psychological trick. Elaine had stopped screaming and was now violently hyperventilating, her hands clutching her chest as she rocked back and forth on the cheap sofa. You cannot do this, Big O finally stammered, his deep voice reduced to a pathetic, ragged whisper. Bookies and loan sharks do not use the legal court system. They do not file official property liens. You are completely bluffing. Marcus operates strictly in the shadows. He would never involve corporate lawyers. I smiled, a sharp, unforgiving expression that offered absolutely no comfort. You are entirely correct about one thing, Otis. Marcus Thorne absolutely hates the legal spotlight, but he also deeply hates losing his capital. When degenerate gamblers like you continuously fail to pay their massive debts, syndicates do not just politely walk away. They bundle those toxic debts and quietly sell them off for pennies on the dollar to aggressive private collection agencies willing to do the dirty legal work. Marcus sold your specific promissory notes 3 weeks ago. I slowly walked over to the cheap coffee table. Evelyn Vance seamlessly handed me another thick, legally sealed folder. I held it up for the entire room to see. My venture capital firm quietly owns a majority stake in the exact private equity group that operates that specific collection agency. I explained, my voice echoing with terrifying clarity. When my forensic accountants discovered Xavier was actively stealing my money to pay Marcus, I made a few private phone calls. I explicitly instructed my agency to purchase your debt portfolio directly from the syndicate. Big O legs finally gave out. He collapsed heavily into his worn recliner, the springs groaning under his sudden dead weight. He stared blankly at the floor, his mind completely unable to process the sophisticated corporate warfare I had just waged against him. You did not just owe Marcus money, Otis, I continued smoothly, stepping closer to his chair. You were incredibly desperate. You needed more time, so you foolishly signed physical, legally binding promissory notes using the actual deed to this residential property as your direct collateral. You legally transferred the ultimate power of your home to a violent criminal, and that criminal happily sold that immense power directly to me. I pulled a single crisp sheet of paper from the folder. I deliberately dropped it onto the coffee table right in front of him. I slid the official foreclosure notice across the table until it touched the very edge of his trembling fingers. Read it carefully, Otis, I commanded sharply. It is an official court-approved notice of immediate foreclosure. You completely gambled away the very roof over your family head. You have exactly 30 days to vacate this premises before the county sheriff arrives to forcefully physically remove you and your belongings from the property. Big O did not reach for the paper. He could not even bring himself to look at it. His massive, calloused hands were shaking so violently he had to grip the armrests of his chair just to keep them steady. The arrogant, toxic patriarch who had loudly demanded my complete financial submission was now utterly destroyed, stripped of his fake power, and exposed as a pathetic gambling addict who had ruined his entire family. I looked down at him, feeling a profound sense of absolute vindication. "You called me a failure, Otis," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a sharpened blade. "You stood in my beautiful backyard eating the expensive food I paid for and boldly called me a failure because I did not submit to a man who could not even balance a simple checkbook. You loudly demanded my hard-earned money to build up your glorious family legacy. You told everyone I needed to be put in my proper place." I paused, allowing the heavy words to fully sink into his shattered ego. "Congratulations, Big O. Your legacy belongs to me now. Everything you thought you owned, everything you proudly bragged about is currently sitting entirely inside my corporate asset portfolio." Xavier let out a loud, agonizing groan. He finally lifted his head from his hands, his bloodshot eyes staring at his father in complete, unadulterated horror. "You put a lien on the house?" Xavier asked, his voice cracking with absolute disbelief. "Dad, you explicitly promised me the house was completely safe. You swore to me that if I just gave you the money from Charmaine's savings account, the debt would be totally cleared. You said the house would eventually be my inheritance." Big O could not look at his son. He kept his eyes securely fixed on the floor, his jaw clenched tight in deep shame. "He lied to you, Xavier," I interjected smoothly, not allowing Big O any room to manipulate the narrative. "He manipulated your desperate need for his toxic validation to actively fund his degenerate addiction. He completely drained your bank accounts, forced you to steal from your own wife, and convinced you to completely destroy your marriage, all to save his own pathetic skin. And in the end, he lost the house anyway." Xavier stood up violently, his fists clenched tight. "You completely ruined my life," he screamed at his father, the years of repressed anger finally exploding. "I lost my beautiful wife. I lost my music studio. I lost every single penny I ever had because I blindly followed your stupid, outdated advice. You told me I needed to be the man of the house, but you are not even a real man yourself. You are just a broke, pathetic liar." Elaine suddenly stood up, pointing a shaking finger directly at Big O. "Is it true, Otis?" she shrieked hysterically, her voice echoing painfully in the small room. "Did you secretly gamble away our entire home? Where are we supposed to live now? We do not have any retirement money left because you made me empty the accounts to pay for that stupid lawyer you wanted to hire today." Big O finally snapped. He jumped out of the recliner, his face twisting with ugly defensive rage. "Shut up, both of you!" he roared loudly, desperately trying to reclaim his lost authority. "I was just trying to multiply the money. I was trying to win enough to take care of this entire family. It was just a temporary run of bad luck. If Xavier had just controlled his arrogant wife better, none of this would have ever happened." Tyrell, who had been standing frozen in the corner the entire time, slowly walked forward. His designer sunglasses were pushed up on his head, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "Wait a minute," Tyrell stammered, looking frantically between his father and me. "If the house is completely gone and Xavier's studio is officially seized, what exactly happens to me? Jasmine and I do not have anywhere to live. The motel requires a massive payment tomorrow morning. My luxury car was completely repossessed today. We need cash right now." I looked at Tyrell with absolute disgust. "You are 30 years old, Tyrell. I strongly suggest you fill out a job application. The free ride is officially permanently over. The Bank of Charmaine is permanently closed, and the Bank of Big O is currently in severe negative equity." Jasmine burst into loud, theatrical tears, dramatically dropping onto the cheap sofa next to Elaine. "This is entirely your fault," she screamed directly at Tyrell, her perfectly manicured nails digging aggressively into his arm. "You specifically told me your family was incredibly wealthy. You promised me a massive luxury lifestyle. Now I am sleeping in a filthy motel and my car is completely gone. I cannot post this on social media. I am completely ruined." The sheer chaos unfolding in the living room was a masterful symphony of absolute destruction. They were rapidly turning on each other like starving animals trapped in a tiny cage. Without my money to artificially prop up their fake lifestyles and soothe their toxic egos, the entire family dynamic immediately collapsed into bitter resentment and vicious finger-pointing. I watched them scream at each other for a few more moments, committing the pathetic scene entirely to memory. This was exactly what they completely deserved. They had arrogantly tried to drain my life force to feed their endless entitlement. Now they were left with absolutely nothing but the toxic consequences of their own incredibly greedy actions. I turned to Evelyn Vance, who was quietly watching the implosion, with a highly satisfied smirk on her face. "We are completely finished here, Evelyn," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the loud arguing. "There is absolutely nothing left in this house worth taking anymore." Evelyn nodded professionally, snapping her sleek leather briefcase completely shut. "I will ensure the county sheriff receives the official eviction timeline tomorrow morning," she confirmed smoothly. I turned around and walked slowly toward the front door, the heavy process server quickly stepping aside to clear my path. I did not look back. I did not offer any final words of fake sympathy. I stepped out into the cool night air, the chaotic screaming of the completely ruined family, fading slightly behind the heavy wooden door. My private driver was waiting patiently by the town car, holding the rear door wide open for me. I slid gracefully into the luxurious leather seat, feeling a massive invisible weight completely lift from my shoulders. The toxic chains they had desperately tried to wrap around my entire life were now permanently shattered. I had successfully protected my empire, defended my absolute worth, and delivered a devastating lesson in corporate karma they would never, ever forget. The engine purred softly as we drove away from the dark suburban neighborhood, leaving the shattered remnants of Big O's pathetic legacy far behind in the rearview mirror. The war was officially over, and I had absolutely won everything. Big O had charged out of the house. He was sprinting down the driveway like a rabid animal, his face contorted in absolute madness. He threw his heavy body against the back of the moving vehicle, desperately trying to smash the reinforced rear window with his bare fists. "Stop the car!" he roared into the cold night air. "You are not walking away from me. You owe me. You owe this entire family." My driver slammed on the brakes, but before I could even instruct him to lock the heavy doors, the massive process server intervened. The heavily built legal enforcer had been walking to his own vehicle parked on the street. He sprinted forward, grabbing Big O forcefully by the collar of his stained shirt and throwing him hard onto the damp front lawn. Big O hit the grass heavily, gasping for air, but the humiliation was far from over. The front door of the house burst open again. Tyrell marched down the driveway, followed closely by a hysterical Jasmine. They did not run to help their fallen patriarch. They walked right past him. Tyrell stood over his father, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated disgust. "You lied to us," Tyrell screamed loudly, kicking the wet grass near Big O's head. "You told me to quit my job because we were going to be rich. You told me the house was paid off. You ruined my entire life just to cover your illegal gambling bets. You are a complete fraud." Jasmine did not even bother screaming at Big O. She turned her venom entirely onto Tyrell. She shoved him hard in the chest, her face red with fury. "I am officially done with this broke, pathetic family," she announced loudly. "You are not a real estate mogul. You are a massive loser living in a cheap motel, and your father is a broke gambling addict. Do not ever call my phone again." She adjusted her cheap sweatpants, turned on her heel, and began aggressively walking down the dark street, completely abandoning her husband of 5 years on the spot. Tyrell stared after her, then looked down at his father groaning in the grass. He shook his head, spat directly on the driveway, and walked away in the opposite direction. The great patriarchal legacy had completely cannibalized itself in less than 10 minutes. The very next morning, the financial consequences shifted directly to Xavier. At exactly 8 o'clock, I received a secure video feed link from the commercial property management team overseeing the hostile asset seizure at the music studio. I sat at my sleek office desk, drinking a fresh espresso, and watched the brutal reality unfold live on my bright computer screen. The commercial bank representatives had arrived early, accompanied by two armed security guards and a professional locksmith. They efficiently cut the old locks, chained the heavy glass front doors shut, and posted bright orange seizure notices directly across the windows. At 9:15, Xavier pulled into the studio parking lot in his standard sedan. He was not alone. He was accompanied by four of his regular entourage members, the guys he proudly called his boys. These were the exact same men who constantly drank his expensive liquor, used his studio time for free, and constantly fed his massive ego by calling him a brilliant music producer. They piled out of the car laughing and joking loudly, entirely ready for another fully funded day of pretending to be successful industry executives. Xavier walked confidently up to the front doors, completely unaware of the massive bright orange notices, until he was standing inches away from the glass. On the video feed, I watched his entire body go completely rigid. He grabbed the heavy metal door handle and yanked it aggressively, but the thick steel chains held firm. He pressed his face against the glass, looking into the dark, completely empty reception area. The bank had already cleared out the expensive mixing consoles, the premium microphones, and the custom leather seating. The physical studio was entirely gone. It was just an empty, hollow shell. His entourage quickly gathered around him, their laughter dying instantly. "What is going on, man?" one of the guys asked, pointing at the legal notices taped to the glass. "Why are the doors locked? Where is all the gear?" Xavier stumbled backward, his hands shaking violently as he pulled out his phone. He was undoubtedly checking his bank accounts, desperately hoping for a miraculous banking error. But there was no error. The accounts were permanently frozen. The money was completely gone. "It is over," Xavier whispered, his voice caught on the high-definition security microphone. "They completely took the studio. They took absolutely everything. I do not have any money left to pay for the recording sessions today. I cannot even afford to buy lunch for us." The reaction from his deeply loyal boys was incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. There was no sympathy. There was no offer to help him rebuild his dream. There was only immediate, cold rejection. The men looked at each other, realizing the free ride they had enjoyed for years was instantly over. "That is incredibly messed up, man," the leader of the group said dismissively, taking a large step away from Xavier. "But we have a personal brand to build. We cannot waste time hanging around a closed studio. Good luck figuring out your money issues." They turned their backs on him and walked straight toward the nearby public transit station, completely abandoning Xavier in the empty parking lot. He stood entirely alone, staring blankly at the chained doors of his ruined dream. He had sacrificed his marriage, his financial security, and his personal integrity to please his toxic father, and in the end he was left with absolutely nothing and absolutely no one. I closed the video feed on my laptop, feeling a deep, highly satisfying sense of absolute closure. The first massive domino had officially fallen. Exactly 1 week later, the final, most devastating domino came crashing down to the earth. I took a rare morning off from my venture capital firm. I dressed casually but elegantly in a warm cashmere sweater and dark designer jeans. I drove my luxury sedan directly back to the same dark suburban neighborhood, but this time the bright morning sun was shining clearly. I parked my car directly across the street from Big O House, keeping the heavy engine running quietly to power the climate control. I picked up my premium artisan coffee from the cup holder, took a slow, highly enjoyable sip, and watched the grand finale of my carefully orchestrated corporate revenge unfold in real time. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, a heavy white county sheriff cruiser pulled up to the front curb. Two fully uniformed deputies stepped out, holding thick clipboards containing the official court-ordered eviction mandate. Right behind them, a massive commercial moving truck aggressively backed into the cracked concrete driveway. Big O 30-day grace period had been legally bypassed due to severe outstanding tax liabilities. My forensic accountants had cleverly unearthed and immediately reported to the State Revenue Board. The eviction was now immediate and completely non-negotiable. The deputies banged loudly on the front door. It took several minutes before Big O finally answered, He looked 10 years older than he had just a week ago. His posture was completely hunched, his face deeply lined with heavy stress and severe sleep deprivation. The deputies did not waste time arguing. They handed him the official paperwork and explicitly ordered him to step off the physical property immediately. Elaine stumbled out right behind him, crying loudly and clutching a few small personal bags. They were aggressively escorted to the edge of the public sidewalk. The garbage had finally been permanently removed from my life. 6 months passed since that crisp morning I drove away from the absolute ruins of my former marriage. Within minutes, the professional moving crew began ruthlessly clearing the house. They dragged out the cheap, worn recliner Big O had proudly sat in like a king. They carried out the heavy dining room table where he had arrogantly demanded I fund a $60,000 luxury wedding. They dumped boxes of cheap belongings unceremoniously onto the damp front lawn. The neighbors, the exact same affluent people Big O had constantly tried to impress, were now standing on their porches, openly staring at the incredibly humiliating spectacle. I sat comfortably in my warm leather seat, watching Big O pull his older model cell phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the phone twice before finally dialing a number. He put it to his ear, pacing frantically on the concrete sidewalk. According to the private investigator, I still had monitoring the situation. He was aggressively calling Xavier, begging his son to come rescue them with a rental truck or a handful of cash. But Xavier could not help him. Xavier was currently sleeping on a stained couch in a cramped one-bedroom apartment belonging to a distant cousin, completely destitute and severely depressed. Big O ended the call, his arm dropping limply to his side. He looked at the massive pile of his worldly possessions dumped carelessly on the damp grass. He looked at his crying wife, who was loudly blaming him for their absolute financial ruin. And then, slowly, his tired eyes drifted across the quiet street and locked directly onto my parked luxury vehicle. The dark-tinted windows obscured my face, but he knew exactly who was sitting inside. He knew I was watching. He knew I had orchestrated every single detail of his total destruction. He did not scream. He did not point a shaking finger. He simply lowered his heavy head in complete, devastating defeat. The arrogant patriarch was entirely broken. I took one final, highly satisfying sip of my warm coffee. I shifted the heavy engine into drive, pulled smoothly away from the curb, and drove back toward the massive, beautiful empire I had successfully protected. The garbage had finally been permanently removed from my life. As for me, the permanent removal of their heavy, toxic, dead weight acted like premium rocket fuel for my professional career. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, the senior board of directors at my venture capital firm called me into the main executive conference room. They had watched me navigate high-stakes corporate acquisitions with absolute ruthless precision, completely unbothered by personal drama. They officially promoted me to senior partner. I was given my own massive corner office with sweeping panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline, a substantial increase in my equity shares, and the absolute power to direct our primary investment strategies. But the wealth and the prestigious corporate title were no longer my only driving forces. I knew there were thousands of other successful women out there currently enduring the exact same financial abuse I had barely survived. Women who were actively shrinking themselves to protect the fragile egos of the men around them. I launched a private, highly funded mentorship program specifically dedicated to young Black women entering the cutthroat corporate and entrepreneurial spaces. Twice a month, I host intensive financial literacy seminars in my corporate boardroom. I look out at these brilliant, ambitious young women, and I teach them the absolute critical importance of aggressive asset protection. I teach them how to properly structure a blind trust, how to fiercely negotiate an ironclad prenuptial agreement, and how to spot the dangerous red flags of financial parasitism early. I tell them that their massive success is an incredible asset, but it can also be a bright beacon for lazy, entitled opportunists seeking a free ride. I actively train them to build tall, impenetrable walls around their peace and their pockets. One evening after a particularly emotional mentorship session, where a young tech developer confessed she was paying off her boyfriend credit card debt just to keep the peace in her household. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table and delivered the harsh, absolute truth. I looked into the eyes of every single woman in that room and shared the ultimate lesson my disastrous marriage had taught me. Black love is beautiful. I told them, my voice echoing with profound sincerity and hard-earned wisdom. It is a powerful, deeply historical bond that should ideally uplift and protect both partners equally. But it should never, under any circumstances, require you to set yourself on fire just to keep a grown man warm. You are not a rehabilitation center for broken male egos. You are not a financial safety net for grown adults who refuse to work. Society will constantly try to convince you that a woman's true value is measured by how much she is willing to sacrifice for her family. They will loudly call you masculine or bitter when you set firm boundaries. Let them call you whatever they want, as long as they call you from outside of your securely gated property. Respect is earned through consistent, honorable actions, not blindly assigned by gender or outdated patriarchal tradition. Do not ever apologize for outgrowing the people who only wanted to use you as a stepping stone. I dropped the dead weight and I have never flown higher. The journey from being a financially exploited wife to a completely liberated corporate powerhouse was the most difficult battle of my entire life. But looking out at the glittering city lights from my beautiful, secure home, I know the brutal war was entirely worth it. I reclaimed my throne, protected my assets, and completely rewrote my own destiny. Now I want to hear from all of you watching this video today. Have you ever had to financially cut off toxic family members or a manipulative partner? How did they react when the personal ATM finally closed and the free ride permanently ended? Tell me your story in the comments section below. I read every single one of them. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of strong, independent individuals taking back their power. And remember, no matter who tries to guilt you or shame you into shrinking your success, protect your empire at all costs. Thank you so much for watching my journey. I hope my story gives you the absolute courage to finally stand up for yourself and demand the profound respect you truly deserve in this beautiful life.